participate in the show. Hello, welcome to Radio FM 88 Australia. We're broadcasting live simulcast on radio as well as through the Facebook sites. It's 7 o'clock in the Australian East Coast. It's Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, ACT. It's 9 o'clock in New Zealand. It's 10 o'clock to our UK listeners and viewers. And today we've got an interesting array of two gentlemen who are right at the top there. Yeah. So one we've got in the Australian bush, right out there in the Never Never. He's operating from his car, so feels like Get Smart there in the cone of silence, or from the Twilight Zone. But above me is Sri, and he's sitting there in Singapore. So, and of course, over on this side, that side, it's amazing the mirror reflection, is my co-host and good mate, Julia, who's here in Brisbane. And so welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for coming on board.
G'day. Thanks, Jeff.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Great, welcome everyone who's listening in, tuning in to Dreaming the New Dream. We are going to be talking very much dream stuff today, as in everybody dreams of union, not separation. And the two gentlemen that we've invited in the show have been following and translating and delving into the yogic tradition of the Patanjali Sutras, which is an ancient guide to the spiritual journey, which have guides and instructions for freeing ourselves from perceptions and thoughts that cause us to feel separate from ourselves, each other, and nature, and thus reduce suffering in our life. So good evening, everyone. Good evening, Sreekanth Raghunath. You're based in India. You've done a PhD you've studied, you have a PhD from UQ, and you've studied Sanskrit and traditional Indian philosophical and spiritual texts in your formative years, and you've been collaborating with Queensland-based Dan Alder, who teaches yoga classes, workshops, and teacher trainings. And the two of you have collaborated to bring out this book, the latest translation, Your Style of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So welcome onto the show.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So Dan, we might start off with you. What started you off on this journey?
Everything about my yoga life happened entirely unexpectedly and almost by incident or accident. And none of it was planned at all. Like finding yoga as a practice in the first place was just, like I say, unexpected. And everything that followed from that has been very much unexpected. Meeting Sreekanth, unexpected, and certainly beginning to, inquire very deeply into the Yoga Sutras was also unexpected. But I guess it just all came around through curiosity. And curiosity, I would say, is what has got this whole thing started.
You've got an inquiring mind and you're a seeker. So what is it? We always have push-pull factors. What is it that caused you to go looking for yoga and these instructions behind the scenes?
Sure. Well, I guess it's kind of a case of one thing leads to another, and the thing about yoga practice that I have found to be most powerful and transformative is the philosophical aspect of yoga. And when I was first introduced to some of the philosophy, I just found it to be so very, very agreeable and also very, very useful. And one of the things that I liked most about it was that it didn't seem to be a set of things that you must do, but it was framed in a much more gentle way than that. Sort of like, if you would like to live a better life, if you would like to have more peace, here's a set of guidelines that might help you to do that. There was no sort of damnation attached to the ideas, which I found to be helpful.
Yeah, it's not like the 10 Commandments, sort of follow these or die in hell.
Yes.
And Sreekanth, can I switch to you? So, what's your background? How have you come to immerse yourself in this philosophy?
Yeah. So for me, in my formative years, I was quite widely exposed to some of these traditional practices back in India when I was a student in high school and up to undergraduate studies. And then I was trained as a like in the asana and pranayama practice back in India at the S. Vyasa school, and that was pretty much the exposure towards the physical aspect of yoga. And then I happened to like start listening to quite a lot of talks on this topic of yoga, and started reading upon texts on these topics, and developed an interest over a period of time. And again, I would say quite a bit of it was by chance, and it was not something that I started to look towards, but happened organically. And I think some of the other contributors in this case would be my training in music, which is Indian classical music, which is basically devotional in nature. And that kind of helped segue into this kind of an area where working on topics such as identifying who we are as a being and that kind of stuff. So yeah. So that's where it started, and then all the things that happened in Brisbane and back now in the last couple of years over these great discussions on the book translation. So that's been the journey.
So thank you for that. It sounds like you grew up with it, and but it's had enough to draw you in deeper. We did have John Balam on the show, who does Kirtan, and the chanting. Actually, Janine, who's introduced us to Dan, introduced me to. I went chanting with her, and I think turning up and not knowing what it is you're singing is, for an intellectual person, quite confronting. So I can imagine that one would want to investigate and find out what it is giving one's energy and time and space to. But I'm really curious, as an aerospace engineer, sort of how do you integrate the two, sort of like?
Yeah, so
they're not separate, and they're obviously not paradoxical. I think there's a link there that you might be able to explain that other people can't.
Yeah. So on a day-to-day basis, we end up coming across quite a few challenges in our own lives in a variety of different areas, not only professional but personal, and all these kinds of different areas. And I found following some of these instructions, and also listening to some of these talks related to this topic of identifying or what we identify ourselves as, and how that has a bearing on what we suffer as an individual, was something that was really striking for me. And that's when I began exploring further into this topic of what it all means to be in union and such. And as an engineer, how this comes about as a tool is it keeps me grounded in my professional life as well. It's not like some of these aspects of, say, the nature of how we handle our egos and these identity issues at workplace and all that can also be, we can see some of those solutions in yogic's description as well, in these sutra descriptions, and you can apply that to your daily day-to-day life challenges as well. And that's what I found is quite useful for me, looking at it from that perspective.
Mm. And I understand the the guide, this book that the two of you have translated is ancient. It's like what, 200 or 300 before Christ or after Christ? I can't remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the guides are centered around what they say 8 limbs. So you've got yama, restraints, niyama, discipline, asana, physical postures, 4 pranayama, breath control, pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses. I'm going to ask you about that. I'm interested in that. Dhyana, concentration or focus, I guess. Dhyana, meditation, and then 8 samadhi, bliss or enlightenment, presumably cultivating that. So, and it's there's a lot of scriptures around that. How is it organized? Sort of, if you were going to invent a manual to enlightenment, which I presume is what this is. What's the structure? What's the organization?
Probably let Dan take that first, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. The structure is like beautifully elegant and very, very simple. Although incredibly difficult to actually do and to practice and ultimately to accomplish. But the structure is just glorious. Patanjali, he begins by telling us exactly what it is that the end goal is, if you like, and that is that yoga is mind fluctuation cessation. So this is essentially finding an incredible peace within the mind that isn't even disturbed by things as agreeable as love or joy. It's a mind state that is essentially free from even your own experience. And then those 8 limbs that you mentioned, that is one of the pathways to this state, which is called samadhi. So it's so those 8 limbs, they all fit into about it's probably about 30 sutras, and they're very, very terse, and there's not even all that much instruction. It's more a case of, rather than telling you what to do, it's a case of, if you're able to do this, this will result from it. And so the first thing that Patanjali tells in the 8 limbs is the yamas, as you say. And this is the practice of replacing harmful thoughts with non-harmful thoughts, untruthful thoughts with truthful thoughts, desirous thoughts with non-desirous thoughts, and a couple of others along similar lines. And so this is the foundation for finding peace within your own mind, removing what's called vitarka, sort of, I guess, that is just ill thought or troubling thoughts. And so once the mind is free from troubling thoughts, it's much easier to find a great depth of peace. So through the limbs you go onto the second limb, which is really the precepts or the necessities of bringing the mind to peace, and asana, your posture just simply needs to be stable and comfortable. Your breath, your prana, like the posture, needs to be stable and comfortable, or long and subtle, as Patanjali puts it. And when these things have been set into place, the pratyahara, which you said you'd ask about, basically what Patanjali says there is that the mind mimics what the senses have already done. So you might know if you meditate, or even if you just, concentrate on a book, as you're reading the words on the page, the sounds around you soften until you no longer pay them attention. So you could say that the ears withdraw from their sense object, the sound. And so pratyahara is the mind withdrawing from its sense objects, which are thoughts. And then that allows one to begin concentration, dharana. And so that's at limb number 6 right there. And then you've got dhyana, which is a more concentrated version of dharana. And finally, samadhi, which is when all identification, including identification of yourself as somebody who is involved in a practice, drops away, and there's no differentiation between, or separation, if you like, between the seer and what is seen. So yeah, that's the 8 limbs in 45 seconds.
You have quite a gift for putting it very simply, and it certainly makes one want to find out or experience more. The aspect of withdrawing your senses, I think we understand that. What is it like when the ego falls away, or that sense of self dissolves? What does it feel like to the two of you?
Do you want to take that, Shree?
I think I was on mute. Yeah, sure. I can take that. So when you say you drop your ego, it's not the easiest of things to do, and maybe does not happen very often either. So there's always a struggle to actually be able to do that in the first place. But when that happens, I think it is a feeling of, I would say, acceptance of what's happening around you, and also I would also consider it expansion. You tend to see yourself not just limited to this body, but as an expansive presence around here. So those are when you limit yourself to just your egotistic self, it is kind of restrictive, and I think it pretty much binds you into a space where there is possibility of more and more suffering. And when you are able to stretch yourself and expand to see yourself as one with your surroundings, that brings in a lot of comfort, at least in my perspective. So that's what has been my experience so far. Yeah.
And then it's an experience that you try and recreate as often as possible, because it's so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
What about you, Dan? You first experienced it.
So when did I first experience that?
Yep.
Yeah, look, I have a way of thinking about that particular idea, which might seem like I'm trying to back out of answering the question, but if the ego does disappear, then there's nothing there to see the experience that remains. So I certainly know what it's like to have my ego reduced in size from, being as big as anybody's, to being hardly noticed at all by myself. And that, the ego gets smaller and smaller as you give less and less attention to it. So you can lose yourself or lose your ego through practically any task. And the ego grows bigger as soon as you ask yourself, like, what's in it for me? Or am I enjoying this? Or is this difficult? Or how much longer is this going to last? So the egoless state is a little, I think, what Sri suggested, where you're just in the moment and there's a sense of losing yourself in what you're doing. And so that can be task oriented. But in my mind, what makes the practice of meditation so difficult is because meditation is really not task orientated, like cleaning or studying or exercising or walking. And so when the mind is left with only itself rather than interaction with an activity, the ego dropping away becomes much more difficult for myself anyway. I find that the ego starts to kick and scream a lot when I sit still and and try to find peace.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's why a lot of people get drawn to moving meditation forms, which I think I would count yoga in, and qigong as one, because you just kind of become, and the mind isn't restless. And I guess my question is, with the sutras, I mean, the 8 limbs are sort of steps and processes that you engage with in order to obtain that state of samadhi. Is there extra value of chanting the sutras or reading them or pronouncing them that adds particular magic to the whole process? Or what is driving you, Dan, for example, to team up with Sreekanth to understand Sanskrit?
Yeah, my interest, more so than understanding and learning Sanskrit, the language, is to learn and understand the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And learning Sanskrit happens to be a bit of a side benefit to that learning. Sorry, Julia, I've forgotten the crux of the question.
Yeah, I guess, okay, well, I guess the question is, why translate it now? I'm sure there are existing translations that outline the steps
Sure.
that need to be followed. These are the milestones or the path to enlightenment. What is engaging you, or what are you finding, or what are you learning as you, go and reinvent the wheel, as in translating it directly for yourself? Sure. What is it doing for you?
Yeah, I think, so I guess initially it began by reading other people's interpretations and commentaries on the sutras. And some of the commentary and the translations are quite eye-opening in terms of they're rather surprising in what they say. And I have a little bit of a skeptical mind. And one day I just sort of thought to myself, I wonder if I'm able to read this for myself. Am I able to look at the words as they're written in Devanagari script, the language, well, the writing of Sanskrit, and see for myself that this translation is in fact what they say. So I guess it came about through what I'd like to think is a healthy dose of skepticism. But yeah, to answer the other part of the question, what has come through actually doing it? And I think it's like there have been so many surprises, and the journey of discovery has just been so wonderful that at times I almost feel like I've been on fire. My mind has just been utterly blown at the depth, but also just the elegant simplicity and stark observation of the Yoga Sutras. And it's one thing to have it told to you by somebody else. It's quite another thing I have found to discover it for yourself. And so, yeah, so that self-discovery, or because a lot of the time, occasionally Sri and I will come up with a different translation, one that is not only worded differently, but also has a different meaning. But most of the time, our translations are quite similar to that of others. And even still, just working out the translation and understanding it for ourselves is really a very exciting and powerful thing to do. And I find that is how I learn best. I learn well by reading and listening to others, but I learn better through doing for myself.
And what about you, Sri? Have you had any big game changes or eureka moments while you're working with Dan on this translation?
Yeah, certainly. So, as Dan was mentioning, there's a lot of content around, and when you read through it, you are essentially a consumer of that content, and you form your ideas and beliefs around some of that content. But when you work through a text like this, which is like really fundamental in nature, it reminds me of an engineering practice which is called as first principles based approach. So first principles is where you go back all the way to the basic fundamental concepts of physics or mathematics, and then derive step by step from there to your end solution on an engineering problem. So this is essentially doing something like that. So it was just consuming content out there which is based on, say, someone else's belief or their way of interpreting a particular sutra, going into the root of it, looking at the word meanings etymologically, and trying to decipher those words to see how they actually fit into the context, and what they actually mean in that context, and that kind of an understanding. So doing it with that first principle sort of an approach was something that was really an eye-opening experience. So yeah, previous readings of the same work, there may be similarities in some bits, but the way we had to break it down into its parts and look at it from the ground up was really an enriching experience for me too.
And that, sorry to jump in, but it leads me to think about how our process together became really very disciplined, because prior to beginning the work with Sri, my curiosity led me to have a go at translating the sutras on my own, and I did so very unsuccessfully. I made some huge whopping errors just purely because I didn't have somebody such as Sri to help guide me along. So Sri and I ended up talking about those translations that I came up with myself, and somewhere along the way, Sri said that if we're going to translate these sutras as literally as we possibly can, because that's how I wanted to understand them, then we should be able to write the translation in English in the same word order that the sutra has been formulated in Sanskrit. And that methodology is something that we have stuck to, and it's been really, really very just exciting watching these translations with that methodology in mind come to life, because again, like many of the translations hold the same meaning as so many other translators, but with that methodology, it really, particularly for me, because I don't have a very good understanding of Sanskrit grammar, etc. So being able to read them and understand them and translate them in that way has, I feel, provided a great deal of depth that otherwise might not be there.
Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. Okay, for the uninitiated who are watching the show, what's a sutra?
Sure. A sutra is a word that basically translates in a couple of ways into English. One way is thread, and so a thread as in like a fabric, and so it takes many threads to make a fabric. So all these sutras are intertwined, and together they create something that is like extremely robust and very insightful. Another way to think of a sutra is as an aphorism, being an extremely terse sentence, not even a sentence. It's had everything that is unnecessary to its meaning stripped away and left with nothing other than the essentials.
Would you consider that to be a noun rather than a verb?
Sutra?
Yeah.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Okay. So interesting, you're saying you're taking Sanskrit, which is a really old ancient language which has its own phonetics and its own sound language, and you're translating into English, which is really a bastardized language. That's a really interesting task. And I was interested to hear what you had to say about how you done your translation, then you hand it over to Sri to get his interpretation. So, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of interpretations on manuscripts have always seem to have been lost in translation. Can I put to you that sometimes you can pick up an object, I think the word's called psychometry, and it's left with an energy imprint that you can actually sense and feel. And the same would go, I would suggest, if you found one of the original manuscripts that's been translated from Sanskrit to Sanskrit to be handed out, and find that the author behind it has left an indelible image and imprint within the actual manuscript. And it's quite often when you go in and pick it up, you'll actually get what I would consider to be the universal language of pictograms. And so you get the picture comes into mind, and of course the picture tells 1,000 words, and it's a matter of interpretation, how you take that symbology. Is that something that you've actually considered when you've come to the translations?
Do you want to take that, Sri?
Maybe you go first.
Sure.
It's obviously a hard question, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, it was most pointed to you first, and yeah, let me take it after you've gone.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Look. It I guess briefly, Jeff. No, that's not something I've really considered. Like I'm not touching the papers or hearing the words of ancient people. I'm hearing it through, and touching it and seeing it through much more modern means. And I understand that you might be suggesting that a certain energy has passed from older documents to newer ones. And look, that is not something that I personally feel. However, I do feel a benefit which I cannot put into words through understanding and learning the message that is contained within the Yoga Sutras.
The only reason I brought it up is a mate of mine who's since passed away. He wrote his first book, and when you read it, you could actually sense and feel his actual expression in those words, because that's when you actually met him. And when you read sentences and all that stuff, you think, that's how Bill speaks. You know, like you could just tap into it. When he wrote his second and third book, it was handed over to a London copywriter who went through the editorial and then put all the grammatical English stuff and all this stuff, parentheses and, you know, commas, and changed phrases and put in verbs and all that stuff, adverbs. And when I come to read that manuscript again, it wasn't the same manuscript that my mate Bill had written. It was just completely lost its whole essence of what Bill was trying to get across. I'm only saying that only based on personal experience. I just wondered if, just throwing it at you, is it something that you could possibly engender or just get a feel for, something like that?
Mm.
But I guess, Jeff, where your question is leading to is, who is Patanjali? You know, sort of like, you know, who was he? You know, how did he have that power to put everything in a very condensed, terse format? And I kind of understand sutras because I've read the Buddhist sutras. I've actually just had my dad help me do the Heart Sutra and there's the Diamond Sutra, and they are basically like couplets that really are very condensed. It's like, you know, like Jeff, you have chicken stock, chicken soup, then you have the reduced chicken stock. So the sutra is like the reduced one. It's just like, yeah, it's a bit of like a puzzle or a puzzle box that you kind of really have to spend time with and sit with and unlock for you to be able to understand. But anyway, we'll go back to, so Patanjali, who was he?
Good question.
Just before answering that, maybe I'll just go back to the question that Jeff had for us, just to answer the energy aspect of it. So historically, some of these scriptures, especially in the Indian tradition, I would say, have been passed on from generation to generation via not written text, but spoken word, and these chants and verses that we see they were not recorded in a written form until only recently. So especially the Vedas and all these different older spiritual texts that we come across, they were handed from generation to generation via oral traditions, right? So, I mean, that sound definitely carries certain vibrations and its own energy, but how exactly that resides in a book form is something that we can't really judge, I guess, because and that probably also answers one of Julia's earlier questions about how whether chanting these sutras help in any way in this practice as well. So the sutras themselves are not, in this particular case, expected to bring about any particular changes in you as a person, but it's, I mean, in terms of the energy or the sound that it's generating, but it's mostly the meaning that you are looking for in this particular case. But there are other chants that you can see where there's emphasis on the energy generated through that oral chanting process and stuff like that. So just to answer that one. So maybe I'll let Dan take the Patanjali question.
Thanks, Sri. Look, who Patanjali is, to the best of my knowledge, is an open question which has many answers. And so I have concerned myself much more with the sutras that Patanjali has authored more so than the person, just simply because there is no right answer. There are a number of answers for who Patanjali was, but because there's no solid answer, I have just turned my eyes onto the work that he's been credited for, rather than sort of trying to go on a treasure hunt about like who Patanjali is. So, but yeah, look, I guess only to add to that, yeah, I think in your introduction, Julia, you were searching for a time period for the sutras, and again, to the best of my knowledge, they were written sometime around about 200 years after Christ, but it's an unknown length of time prior to that they were transmitted orally from person to person via language that was spoken rather than written. So yeah, so some people say as far back as 4 or even 5,000 years, but again, the sutras I find are timeless, and sometimes I say, and I'll say now, it'll sound silly, but you know, it's like if the sutras were written yesterday, I would still be absolutely blown away by their insight. The fact that they have come to us from at least a couple of thousand years ago just serves to tell me how little people have changed. You know, that humans have always been humans, and humans will always be humans. I get a kick out of that, because it makes me feel like I'm not alone in the human race, that you know, these teachings sort of give us a bit of a framework, even a blueprint to our own nature. And once you once you sort of key into your own nature, I think that gives you a great deal of insight into the nature of others as well. And when that happened for me, I felt like I joined a very large family, because prior to that, I'd felt like I was the only one who, you know, as silly as it sounds, I was much younger then, but, you know, I did go through a time when I thought that I was, you know, the only one who got lonely, or who went through despair or depression, or, you know, felt left out, or that sort of thing. But no, actually. And the more I look to spirituality and religion in general, I start to see that these ideas that humans essentially have a nature, and our behaviors are not all that unpredictable. It just made me feel a part of something much bigger.
Yeah, and I think it gives you more compassion, doesn't it, as well, when you see it happening in other people. It sounds like there's a lot of wisdom in that book, but not much knowledge about the origins. Would it be possible for one of you to read some of what you've translated, so that the audience can get a flavor for it, please?
Sure. Well, so I was going to say, Sri, would you like to read some of the sutras in Sanskrit, and like I could give the English translation afterwards, if you like. First book.
I think he's on mute. Sri, you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was just saying I've got just the first one here with me. The second one is still in preprint, I would say. So it's still on its way. Just any random sutra would do?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Let's go random.
Yeah. So maybe let's I'll just randomly pick number 12. And that one is Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tan Nirodha. So this is the sutra, the little sutra, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tan Nirodha. So Dan, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. Like our translation to that, that's actually an incredibly important sutra, and our translation for it is practice, abhyasa, and vairagya, non-attachment, they cease. And so what do they cease? They cease the fluctuations of the mind. So you sorry, I get very talkative when we get to sutras, but we can make a very clear line between the second sutra. Patanjali tells us yoga is mind fluctuation cessation, and so a natural question is, how do I cease the fluctuations of my mind? And so the 12th sutra that Sri just read is the answer to that. Through practice and non-attachment, that is how the fluctuations of the mind cease.
Beautiful. Well, Janine, Jeff, and Noreen, if you're listening to that and that spoke to you, drop in the comments, and anyone else as well. But yeah, that is very, Jeff, what do you make it? It's very condensed and very terse, isn't it? It's very like bare bones.
I'll tell you, when you're reading it out, and I thought to myself, well, actually, there's a good example. See that palm tree in the back in my book, my site there?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at the whole concept there, that seed was planted in the ground there, and somehow it opened up and it knew its program and what it had to do, put the roots down and start growing, and it keeps bringing out, it might be an old palm tree, but it keeps bringing out new shoots. It just needs, it seems to know what it's got to do. So I'm just wondering, has mankind got a program and it just needs to tap into that same program and everything will flourish and do what it does? But as you boys have spoken about with the ego, man sort of steps out and uses his free will to step outside that original program that could have seen him be the master of this world, where he could, teleport, transmute, manifest, whatever. I mean, I'm just saying, just throwing it at you.
Yeah, look, sorry, I'll try and give a quick answer, but I feel that Patanjali has pointed towards, so this is like, I understand this will be a different and perhaps a disagreeable point of view to some, but I believe that our nature is human nature, and that packed into human nature is ego, is lust, is revulsion towards things that we don't like, is the clinging to life. And so that is the seed which grows within us. But there's other seeds that can grow within us as well. And so which ones do we water and give sunshine? And so if we're able to, essentially what Patanjali is asking us to do is not to escape our nature, but rather to let our nature quieten, because ultimately he wants us to bring the fluctuations of the mind to stillness. And if even when we're engaged in very virtuous and noble action or thought or speech, this is still creating fluctuations through the mind. So Patanjali is really just asking us to quieten our nature, but our nature, as I think of it, is ego, lust, revulsion, and to cling to life. And I would say the proof of that thought is just certainly in myself and in everybody that I know.
And
Sri,
just
do you
to
have
add
anything
to
to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, I'm reminded of one of my teachers, Guru's sayings, which is like meditation is not a part-time profession, but a full-time preoccupation. So you're always in meditation, and any aberrations or anything outside of it is only an aberration, but you're ideally expected to be in meditation as a full-time preoccupation rather than like a part-time profession that we take up. So doing whatever we are doing as part of our daily lives, but keeping this in the background and working with it really, I think, enhances that feeling of peace and tranquility. So, yeah, just to add to what Dan was mentioning.
Yeah. I fully agree with that, Sri. I think a lot of us don't, we're not aware, we don't cultivate awareness of what our thoughts are doing, what energy we're putting out into the world. By doing that, engaging in that practice all the time is one way of taking responsibility for what you're putting out into the world and what will be coming back to you, which leads what to Jeff is saying is about manifesting and then expanding beyond that, what we've been conditioned to, what level we've been conditioned to operate on as a human. But I'd like to just switch the topic a little to how much do you find that all of us are aware of quantum physics now and the field of potential out of which all things arise, whereas in the olden days they didn't have that. Do you find that sort of dissolving into everything? Do you find quantum physics actually gives you some terminology or a frame of reference that you can use when you're translating the sutras? Or is there a bit of a stunned mullet silence here?
Now, Sri's got his mute, so it means he hands it over to Dan.
So, you're the engineer.
Probably look at it from the perspective of consciousness and like the consciousness, field of consciousness, and the concept of consciousness, which also ties in with the quantum physical explanation that you can get on this topic. But I would probably look at it from the perspective of consciousness at this stage for myself. I'm not sure about what Dan, if you have to say anything on this. Whether you want to pick it up from the quantum physics. Okay.
I'll skirt the subject if you don't mind, but I did hear a very fascinating idea put forth by he's like a pop scientist, a string theorist. His name's Brian Greene, and I'm currently about 3/4 through his book. And he mentioned a philosopher named David Chalmers, and he's an Australian fellow. And one of his big ideas was the hard problem of consciousness, trying to put, trying to put our finger on what is consciousness. And I'm sure he wasn't the first person to have this idea, but I think because he's a very prominent philosopher, it got more traction than it otherwise might. But the question about where does consciousness come from is, a pretty deep mystery. And he essentially put forward the notion that perhaps it's embedded in all matter, that like no matter how small, whether it's an atom or something subatomic, like not consciousness as in a thinking, discerning, considering type of consciousness, but just a beingness. Like even awareness is sort of higher order consciousness, but just that, but perhaps the way or why consciousness arises in certain things such as ourselves is because consciousness is a base ingredient of all things, no matter how small. And that was interesting. I've been meaning to tell Sri about this, because one of our ideas about the gunas, which are the qualities of all things, 3 qualities, one of them being a level of visibility, a level of mobility, and then there's this level of sort of consciousness, or even will to change or to do. And so I'm not quite sure, the quantum physics, I've got a passing interest in it, but don't claim to have any understanding of it. It's a pretty bizarre set of ideas. But the consciousness thing I find to be incredibly fascinating, and the idea that perhaps consciousness isn't necessarily the result of mass coming together, but perhaps consciousness is a base ingredient of all things that have mass.
So then we could take it to the analogy you had before of the palm tree, and then the seeds for the ego, but then also in the mix is the consciousness that is universal, but we get a part of it because by virtue of being in a living form on this realm. And therefore, it also enables us, presumably through the back door, to connect with everything else that is alive at this point in time, if not more. Anyway, we don't have to explain how it works, do we? We just have to sort of get everybody enthusiastic about the benefits. So if you've been watching Dreaming the New Dream, we've had Dan Alder and Sreekanth on. They're both authors of the most recent translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Thank you very much for joining us. And if anybody wants to buy the book, Dan, how do they get their hands on it?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to my website, www.danalderyoga.com, and you can just buy it on my little online store there. It's $20 for a book, and it's $9.95 to get it posted to you anywhere in Australia. Or of course, come and have a class or a retreat or something like that with me, and grab one from me in person.
Yeah, we've got Janine saying, great to be delving again into the sutras, and thank you, Jeff and Noreen, for listening as well. And you do workshops as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just because I live out of, out in the country, usually when I teach, it's at least a few hours. So rather than just a short class, it's usually a few hours that allow us to have a longer chat and to explore things a little further.
I see he's got them at Springbrook down in the Gold Coast in the hinterland there.
That's right. Yeah, they got a nice retreat center there, which I go to a couple of times a year. One coming up in a couple of weeks, that's just about full, and another one the 3rd to the 5th of September, which we've not even advertised yet. That's myself and another one of my good friends and fellow teachers, Corey McAvoy, will be doing that retreat together.
Hey, I just want to get Sri on there. Hey, Sri, I tell you what, I've been just noticed your whole disposition. I mean, your face seems to have a real inner glow. It's like it seems to me like you found your happy space. So when you're on the show here, you've actually seemed to have come across as a very a person that you could meet behind a counter and you'd be serving them, and people would feel the warmth and attention, and that you're of service. It seems to me that's your energy that you portray when you have been on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for that. I hope I can be that, like what you're explaining. There is always that effort going towards the direction, and hopefully one day that effort will drop and there won't be any effort to maintain that that level of energy or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, you notice that at various times, it's called tuck shops. You'll get the ladies serving there, and they have that same essence to be of service, and they have this inner smile. That's what you've got. You've got an inner smile. I think that's more of a trust. So when people come up to you to do business, whatever, I'm not too sure what you do in your business career in Singapore, but I would sense that you've got an energy about you that people would trust. I think that's your saving grace. I would say that's put down to your work on the Sanskrit and the language and the doing the samadhis, and being fully aware of it. I think you actually bring the consciousness alive. That's my interpretation of just watching and observing the show tonight. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much for the compliments. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, mate.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone who's been watching us or listening to us Dreaming the New Dream on Radio FM 88 with Dan Alder and Sreekanth, authors of the book of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras translation for the new millennium. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thanks very much, Julia and Jeff.
Thank you.
We'll just stay there, and we'll end the broadcast. You can just stay in the green room, and we'll finish.